programs. And this is a very exciting one because, like normally, we're taking one theme and we're spreading it out and learning a lot about the town of Petersham. So tonight we've got some very exciting parts of that using the old telephone system before dial and what that was and how that brought in. So we've got a number of folks who are going to share their experience on this very, what do you actually call this thing?
Switchboard.
The switchboard, on the switchboard. So we're going to see how the switchboard works. And we got Ann Whittington LePoer and Kathryn Brunelle, and others will share what that has been. So, as you know, Delight is usually floating around at these things, and Delight is a little sick, so she's not here tonight. She's doing okay, she has some tests, but she's not able to come tonight. So our thoughts are with her, and she gave me my little briefing, so I got my dates right, as I met with her this afternoon, as well as Bob Reed and a few others to learn some things. So we're going to, and Richard Bathingwaite is going to be videotaping this, so we have that, and Larry, if you remember, is going to also tape it, so we have plenty of records of this, and we are getting a good collection of videotapes. So before we start talking specifically about this, I want to try to put it in context, because the way we do these, this is where we write the history of Petersham. We come together at a night like this, and people give us some information, and then we start asking questions. And so that's a little bit of format that we're going to be using tonight. But I wanted to, so you can get a little sense of it. I know Ann and Kathryn will be going through a little bit more of the specific, but I want to put it in context, because we're really talking about a 100-year period of what we're talking about. And the first telephone in Petersham was in 1899 at Osgood Store, which is right over there.
Phelps Store.
It was Phelpsted.
F-O-B-E-S.
Okay.
Comes the history of Petersham.
Oh, okay. Well, according to Delight. Okay, so we're getting corrected. That's what we're getting this on tape. You know, we always have to correct this. But there was one line that came into Petersham. And in 1910, we started to have the new, with Hattie Sawtell, and we actually started to have this system coming in here. And there were 100 subscribers that started. Well, this is according to the history that's actually was written on here. So we'll get it correct. So that went through, and then Hattie Sawtell went from 1910 to 1929. And in 1929 was Peg Withington, and she was the operator from 1929 up till 1957. And so there was a lot of things that are happening, and I'm sure tonight, because these folks sitting at this switchboard had the pulse of what was happening. And that's some of the stories we're going to get, because there were some major events. There was the 36 flood, where there was actually more water than 38. Then there was the 38 hurricane. And so there was a lot. I'm sure the switchboard was blasting at that time because of a number of things that we had to get. Like we had to get down and get Mabel Russell because Billy was going to be born right during that day of the hurricane. So those things were happening. And of course, then we go up here, and I did go over, whenever I'm trying to get history of Petersham, I stop and talk to Bob Reed. And Bob Reed will never come to these events, but Bob Reed has an amazing sense of the history. And so Bob was talking about, he didn't get the telephone until about 1948 over there, and that's when he started to have his little trucking, and he actually started to have his school bus. And so it was out as far as the Gales, and then they told him in Apple, it'd be 3 to 5 years before you got it. And so he got telephone in 1948. And his father was known, that's another whole story, but his father actually helped put the telephone poles up on East Street. So, and then of course in 1957 there was so much that was happening. And 1957 is when we went over to dial, and that was on February 12th at 7 a.m. We had 250 subscribers after this 27 and a half years up till then. But that was what, and that was on the Worcester Telegram, and that was in the archives of the thing here. So, and of course, 57 was so amazing. The town hall burned. We had the last high school. We are also looking at other techniques. In probably about 55, we had the first television in town, and there's a question whether that was Colonel Hassett or whether that was Carol Nelson. That's where I saw it first. Anybody know where the first television was in town? Okay, well, that's what we're going to try to get that right. I don't know, but so then we move on, and 1966 we dialed in the Elliott and Buell's farm burn. That was a big communication thing. 1972, the telephone exchange was then given by Sally Harris. It was still in the family of Peg, and so it was given to Historical in 1972. And then we move up here, and we're somewhere around here. We had the first internet computer. That's internet, not just a computer, you know, on your laptop, but basically actually internet out. It was somewhere in the middle 80s. And then Petersham website was about 1996. So it's an interesting progression of how we've done. But tonight we're focusing on this technology, which was, and when you look at the last 100 years, this is a pretty amazing period in the history of Petersham. So Anne will start and give her perspective and what her whole relationship and connection to this. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you. When Larry first asked me to do this, he asked me to give my impressions of being brought up in a house that housed the telephone office to the town. And I guess I would say that it was a love-hate relationship. It was fun. It was exciting. That was open house at the Withington House all the time. People were there all hours of the day and night for many different reasons. And there was a hate relationship because my mom was tried to this. She was responsible for everything that went over this board 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 years, 52 weeks, 365, and a quarter days per year. That doesn't mean that she was sitting here at the board all that time. It meant that she was responsible for seeing that someone was covering, that someone was there, and if somebody called in sick, they meant my mom to go. She did all of the night work, from 10 at night until 8 the following morning. That didn't mean she didn't sleep. It meant that there was a clock in the office, and this little sign that says NA up here stands for night alarm. And whenever anybody used the phone, they would ring the tank, one of these little numbers would drop down. The operator would take the back cord and plug it in, say number please, and whatever number the other person called, they plug it into that number, and then you would have to ring with this little tab in the front. If you looked on a party line, that meant if it was ring 2, you rang 2 short rings. If it was ring 4, you rang 4 short rings. If it was ring 1, 2, you rang 1, 1, 1, and 2 short rings. People tell people that my telephone number was 12, ring 1, 2 or something, and they cannot understand what in the world he's talking about. But anyway, it was an interesting life. People came in, we had a payphone in the hall of our house so that it was open for people to come and use a payphone at any time. We did try to lock the front door at 10 o'clock when my mother went on duty, but there were times when there were people in distress during the night and people would come in and use the payphone at that time. If you have any questions, I probably won't be able to answer them. I'm going to ask them. When Larry asked me to do this, I went through some of my mother's things, and I found that when she left, she wrote this little synopsis of her experiences, and so I will read this to you tonight. Historical data of Petersham Telephone Communications is recorded by Margaret Murphy, Withington House. In 1899, there was just one telephone in town, and it was located in Clove's General Store, and was answered by Miss Chadwick, the bookkeeper. On September 9th, 1899, Miss Chadwick had completed her work for the day and went for her mail. The postmaster asked if it had been a busy day. She replied it certainly was, for Mr. and Mrs. Adolph Brandeis, the parents of Supreme Court Justice Hildy Brandeis, was celebrating their golden wedding anniversary, and they had telephone and telegraph messages of congratulations. Everyone in German. And not knowing the language, every word had to be spelled out, and then she had to find someone to deliver it. Now that comes directly from history of Petersham. By 1910, there were 6 telephones in town. As near as we can find out, Selectman Charles Coolidge, William Pierce, William McNutt, Edwin Dexter, the Stewart, and the Charles Forbes store. The central place for connecting was still the store. When the customers turned the crank on their telephone set, it rang an alarm clock bell to attract the attention of Miss Chadwick at the store. Perhaps Miss Chadwick didn't go to work the day the storekeeper became so irked with the bell ringing, he yanked the thing off the wall and threw it into the road. The next day, April 30th, 1910, Patty Sawtell was brought over from the Athol office to the Petersham telephone office, and it was officially opened with its 6 subscribers. Soon, a magneto switchboard was installed. The company solicited for new subscribers, and the list grew from 6 subscribers in 1910 to 110 in 1919. Patty attended the board alone 24 hours a day until June 6, 1910. She started to teach Clover Smith, Mrs. Jerry Connors. Some of the other early operators were Ruth Barnes, Mrs. Arthur Preble, Fanny Harris, Mrs. Charles Jones of Athol, and Ellen Russell, Mrs. Beecham Harris. Somewhere between 1922 or 23, a brand new self-restoring drop board, the very latest thing in that magneto switchboard, was installed. And to preserve the beauty of the town, all wires in the center of town were with underground cable. Patty Sawtell continued to run the office until poor health forced her to give it up. July 1st, 1929, Margaret Livingston of Gardner took over the duties of serving the town of Petersham. We had 180 subscribers, and in 1957 there were now 260. With all its trials and tribulations, serving the town of Petersham has been very gratifying. Maybe I'll leave it to you to tell about what happens when we have a fire and other things.
Very interesting, because I don't remember ever hearing that. Probably did, but that's a little helpful.
Yeah,
So
well,
that's very interesting.
I might mention that soon after the 1938 hurricane, the telephone company was very interested in putting in a dial system. And my mother attempted to write, or began to write, a book for children describing how the magneto system works. And I have an illustration over there that she did, that little drawing that was going to be included in the book. That's something that she did that never was completed. However, the townspeople were all up in arms when they suggested that we give up our telephone system and our operators and the service that these girls were giving the town. Because they did give up extraordinary service. They truly did. And many of the wealthy people who summoned here were just not going to take the idea of having that taken away from town. And they circulated a petition, and it was taken to the officials of the company. And they fought very hard, and eventually they backed down. And then, of course, along came World War II, and the men and the materials were not available to go ahead and change the system over. And that's the reason, the main reason why it was as late as 1957 that the dam was installed here. You mentioned the hurricane, and I don't know if there are people who are not familiar with Voices from the Hilltop Town, but I did write my experiences during the 1938 hurricane, and if you'll bear with me, I'll read it to you. This was written in memory of my mother, Margaret Livingston. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the 1938 hurricane. That was another section that I wrote. It had been raining for several days. The ground was saturated and severe flooding was occurring in surrounding towns. Although the flooding did not affect my hilltop town, it had caused changes in my family. A call for help came in from the chief telephone operator in neighboring Barry. Due to the flood, her operators were unable to get to work, and she had not had any relief for nearly 2 days. Could my mother spare one of her operators for a few hours? Since my mother was the only operator familiar with their switchboard, she said that she would try to make arrangements to help out for a few hours. My parents had the contract for the Star Route mail deliveries. My mother and I usually delivered the 4 o'clock mail delivery from Petersham to Athol, and upon returning back, the afternoon mail to Petersham. If my mother were to go to Barry, it would mean that my father would have to leave his regular work and go in our place. It was so arranged. Flooding was taking place at Connor's Pond across the main road to Barry. So a call was made to Barry to have a taxi waiting as near to the pond as it could get. My father drove my mother as close as he could, and then he lifted her up and carried her across the waist-high rushing waters to the awaiting taxi. He told her that he would meet her there when he had completed the afternoon mail run. He went on about his work, and she went on to put in her 4-hour stint. The rain continued to come down heavily, and the wind began to increase. The trees were swaying and blowing. My dad had difficulty getting to the post office in Athol because of the flooding, and the mail train had not been able to get through. He picked up a very light delivery and headed back home. By this time, the storm had intensified and the trees were beginning to fall. About a quarter of a mile before his destination, a tree had fallen across the road and blocked his way. He got out of his car and began to walk to the post office. I was standing in the front door of our house looking out at the storm. The 2 big trees in our front yard were swaying precariously. Then I spied my father, hat pulled down over his face, his shoulders hunched, plodding along in the relentless wind and rain. He walked under those very trees just minutes before it came crashing down. At this point, 2 people came to the telephone office to call home and notify their families that they couldn't return home because the trees were down and blocking all the roads. It seems that we had acquired unexpected overnight guests. All of a sudden, the power went out. This meant that the operators had to generate by hand, which meant that we had to which made the magneto work, so that not only did we have to ring, but we also had to generate the power to make the ring. This meant the operators had to generate power by hand. It was not a problem for long, because the falling trees soon knocked out all the phones in town, except for a few around the immediate area of the town common. Here I was, no mother at home, 2 strangers stranded in our house, no electricity, which meant that we could not get water from our well. My problems were trivial compared to those of my parents. My mother was safe and sound in the Barry telephone office, but she had no way to notify us all the telephone lines were down between here and there. She decided that the best thing for her to do was to remain where she was overnight. My dad's only thought was that the appointed hour for my mother's return to Commerce Pond had arrived, and he must be there as soon as possible to bring her home. He found two young men, Mark Reed and Bill Perkins, who agreed to go along to help. As darkness was approaching, they armed themselves with flashlights and kerosene lanterns. They stumbled along, climbing over and around fallen trees and debris for miles. When they arrived at Commerce Pond, they flashed their lights around and called, but the only response they heard was the roar of the water. Reluctantly, they decided to return to town, continuing to shout and shine their lights in all directions in the off chance that they would find her in the midst of all those trees. As it happened, my mother remained in Derry until enough trees had been cleared to make travel possible. She was then given a ride back to town with a telephone repairman in their truck. There was a happy reunion with the family together again. The operators who had been covering for my mother could now return home. Things were beginning to return to our normal routine, but it was truly a time to remember. Over there, people were interested in seeing them. I have the pictures of my mother and Hattie Sartell taken in 1929 when my mother first came to town. That's the one you had up here.
Yes, right.
Is that there? Okay. These were the only two chief operators that the town of Petersham ever had. And then here are some of the early operators. My mother and Larry Zahn, his aunt Edna and his aunt Carrie, who were also operators. And then I have some pictures over there of my mother explaining to my cousin Steve and the workings of the dial system when she was going to
Good. So Ann will come back. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. So Kathryn's going to share her a little bit, and then thank you. And that was an amazing piece of history. Wow.
Well, Ann, as I say, Ann lived there, right at the office. And I remember when I was in high school, I was a little bit of the rest of the work, and she'd yell, "You don't want to work as an operator." She would say in the love-hate. She said, "You're tied to that. You don't want it." But I did apply, and I got out of high school, and that was in 1946, in the spring. And at that time, there was no opening, so I didn't go in until October of 1946. And I stayed there until 1957, and I took the last call on the board. With Mr. Reverend Hopper's wife, Mrs. Hopper, that called in to wish us good luck in our dial. I have these came through the mail just recently, but that was a picture of what we had in our home, the little box and the crank that you rang to bring to get the operator. And this was, we had these candlesticks, I guess they call them, telephones at that time. Most of us anyway had those. I can show those around if you want to see that, but they hadn't seen those. And that was the way you got the operator, was turning a little crank. As Ann said, this little drop would come down, and you would put your plug in. Oh, let me run in. But we had, I think the fire station was 101, if I remember. And that was one thing that we had. They called us if there was a fire. We had to ring the siren. And that was a button out in the hallway beside the front door. You ran out and pushed the button, then you ran back to your switchboard. And of course, when it started to ring, everybody's calling in to know where the fire is. So that you had all these, that's where you got your firemen, so they were called firemen. Of course, you got everybody else in town who wanted to know where the fire was, too. So you soon learned to answer the ones that you knew were firemen first. And I used to go in with just saying, it's wherever it is, not number please first. I think some got a surprise because they didn't know there was a fire. They were calling. And you had to listen to that siren because you had to count it. I think, what was it, 5 was for chimney, I think, 7 for brush, 12 for building, I think. And if Ann's mother was there, she always come in, or her father was too, would come in and help them and listen for us. But if you were there alone in the building, you were counting that along with answering your people at the switchboard. We had one lady that always called in to know, and I knew she didn't have any firemen, so I'd ask the others first. She used to chew me out. The firemen have to get it first. They have to know where to go. And as Ann told about, there's no power. We have a generator with electricity, but no power. We had to ring the crank. Well, I'm left-handed. The ring the crank. And you're ringing this thing, so I still learned that you hold the key, be like that, and then they'd be like that one, instead of trying to work that key for that length of time. And they mentioned party line. As we said about Bob Reed didn't get here till 1948. At that time, he was on an 8-party line. It was 129. I don't remember what his. I don't know if it was 4 or not. But you know, that would be a busy line. And that's all there was in the neighborhood. And he had trucking business. After a while, he put in and he got a 4-party line. 139. But that was busy also. But that was the east end of town. He said that the Gales was where the Johanssons live now. That's as far as the line went. Until Bob got his. And then if we had a thunder shower or anything, the lightning would come in and send all these drops down. So we had a paintbrush. If you pushed them up with a paintbrush, if somebody rang, you were pushing up and you try to figure out where it was that they rang so that you could answer them. But you hope that they were in the theory that you didn't use the phone during the thunder shower. But there were a few people that did. So you really were busier during the thunder shower, pushing up drops. Otherwise, sometimes we weren't too busy. Towards the end we were. The day of the tornado, the tornado we had, that was in
June 9th, 1953.
53, that was it. That day, I was home. I used to work a split shift. Like the phone company has all kinds of things. You had to work 3 hours through a lunch hour. You couldn't have somebody come in for a 1-hour lunch hour. You worked 3 hours. So Barbara used to work 7 to 11, and I'd work 11 to 2. Then I come back 6 to 10 at night. And I was home in the afternoon when the tornado started. The question you didn't know was that bad. It wasn't nice. I mean, we had storm, we had hailstones and everything, and we heard the roar, but I thought it was airplanes. And so when I got up there at 6 o'clock, I found out we had no power, no lights, and the southern part of town had no phones or anything because that's where the tornado had gone through. And Ann's mother was out of town during that day, and she didn't know anything about the storm or anything, and Grandpa was there at that time. And he got me in a kerosene lamp, and we had a lantern type of thing, a battery lantern type, and that's what we had for the switchboard to that. And of course it was people were busy because some part of town still had phones and all, wondering what was going on, power or anything. And we were some of the information bureau for what's going on. Like the doctor used to take Fridays off. I think afterwards he was going down to Springfield to the hospital taking courses or something, but he wasn't in town on Friday. So if anybody called him, we told him he's out of town, he'd be back at 6 o'clock. Or we tell him, When he called in, if he had any calls, we'd tell him, and he had so-and-so called him, and he might call them back if he wanted to. And then the day of the town hall fire, the evening it was, because that was right around 6, I went home at 6. But just before that afternoon, we had trouble with the switchboard. And we only had half